The Almanack of Naval Ravikant, Chapter 2, Episode 1, Building Judgment. This episode covers pages 93 through 110. Building judgment, there's no shortcut to smart. Judgment if you want to make the maximum amount of money possibly. If you want to get rich over your life in a deterministically predictable way, stay on the bleeding edge of trend. DS and study technology, design, and art. Become really good at something. You don't get rich by spending your time to save money. You get rich by saving your time to make money. Hard work is really overrated. How hard you work matters a lot less in the modern economy. What is underrated? Judgment. Judgment is underrated. Can you define judgment? My definition of wisdom is knowing the long-term consequences of your actions. Wisdom applied to external problems is judgment. They're highly linked. Knowing the long-term consequences of your actions and then making the right decision to capitalize on that. In an age of leverage, one correct decision can win everything. Without hard work, you'll develop neither judgment nor leverage. You have to put in the time, but the judgment is more important. The direction you're heading in matters more than how fast you move, especially with leverage. Picking the direction you're heading in for every decision is far more important than how much force you apply. Just pick the right direction to start walking in and start walking. How to think clearly. Clear thinker is a better compliment than smart. Real knowledge is intrinsic and it's built from the ground up. To use a math example, you can't understand trigonometry without understanding arithmetic and geometry. Basically, if someone is using a lot of fancy words and a lot of big concepts, they probably don't know what they're talking about. I think the smartest people can explain things to a child. If you can't explain it to a child, then you don't know it. It's a common saying and it's very true. Richard Feynman very famously does this in 6 Easy Pieces, one of his early physics lectures. He basically explains mathematics in 3 pages. He starts from the number line, counting, and then he goes all the way up to precalculus. He just builds it up through an unbroken chain of logic. He doesn't rely on any definitions. The really smart thinkers are clear thinkers. They understand the basics at a very fundamental level. I would rather understand the basics really well than memorize all kinds of complicated concepts I can't stitch together and can't rederive from the basics. If you can't rederive concepts from the basics as you need them, you're lost. You're just memorizing. The advanced concepts in a field are less proven. We use them to signal insider knowledge, but we'd be better off nailing the basics. Clear thinkers appeal to their own authority. Part of making effective decisions boils down to dealing with reality. How do you make sure you're dealing with reality when you're making decisions? By not having a strong sense of self or judgments or mind presence. The monkey mind will always respond with this regurgitated emotional response to what it thinks the world should be. Those desires will cloud your reality. This happens a lot of times when people are mixing politics and business. The number one thing clouding us from being able to see reality is we have preconceived notions of the way it should be. One definition of a moment of suffering is the moment when you see things exactly the way they are. This whole time, you've been convinced your business is doing great and real. Why you've ignored the signs it's not doing well. Then your business fails. And you suffer because you've been putting off reality. You've been hiding it from yourself. The good news is, the moment of suffering when you're in pain is a moment of truth. It is a moment where you're forced to embrace reality the way it actually is. Then, you can make meaningful change and progress. You can only make progress when you're starting with the truth. The hard thing is seeing the truth. To see the truth, you have to get your ego out of the way because your ego doesn't want to face the truth. The smaller you can make your ego, the less conditioned you can make your reactions, the less desires you can have about the outcome you want, the easier it will be to see the real. What we wish to be true clouds our perception of what is true. Suffering is the moment when we can no longer deny reality. Imagine we're going through something difficult like a breakup, a job loss, a business failure, or a health problem, and our friends are advising us. When we're advising them, the answer is obvious. It comes to us in a minute, and we tell them exactly, "Oh, that girl, get over her, she wasn't good for you anyway. You'll be happier, trust me. You'll find someone. You know the correct answer, but your friend can't see it because they're in the moment of suffering and pain. They're still wishing reality was different. The problem isn't reality. The problem is their desire is colliding with reality and preventing them from seeing the truth, no matter how much you say it. The same thing happens when I make decisions. The more desire I have for something to work out a certain way, the less likely I am to see the truth. Especially in business, if something isn't going well, I try to acknowledge it publicly, and I try to acknowledge it publicly in front of my co-founders and friends and coworkers. Then I'm not hiding it from anybody else. If I'm not hiding it from anybody, I'm not going to delude myself from what's actually going on. What you feel tells you nothing about the facts. It merely tells you something about your estimate of the facts. It's actually really important to have empty space. If you don't have a day or two every week in your calendar where you're not always in meetings and you're not always busy, then you're not going to be able to think. You're not going to be able to have good ideas for your busyness. You're not going to be able to make good judgments. Also encourage taking at least one day a week, preferably two, because if you budget two, you'll end up with one where you just have time to think. It's only after you're bored you have the great ideas. It's never going to be when you're stressed or busy, running around or rushed. Make the time. Very smart people tend to be weird since they insist on thinking everything through for themselves. A contrarian isn't one who always objects. That's a conformist of a different sort. A contrarian reasons independently from the ground up and resists pressure to conform. Cynicism is easy. Mimicry is easy. Optimistic contrarians are the rarest breed. Contrarian S optimist S. Shed your identity to see reality. Our egos are constructed in our formative years, our first 2 decades. They get constructed by our environment, our parents, society. Then we spend the rest of our life trying to make our ego happy. We interpret anything new through our ego. How do I change the external world to make it more how I would like it to be? Tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are. Buddhists saying you absolutely need habits to function. You cannot solve every problem in life as if it is the first time it's thrown at you. We accumulate all these habits. We put them in the bundle of identity, ego, ourselves, and then we get attached to them. I'm Naval. This is the way I am. It's really important to be able to uncondition yourself, to be able to take your habits apart and say, okay, this is a habit probably picked up when I was a toddler trying to get my parents' attention. Now I've reinforced it and I call it a part of my identity. Does it still serve me? Does it make me happier? Does it make me healthier? Does it make me accomplish whatever I set out to accomplish? I'm less habitual than most people. I don't like to structure my day. To the extent I have habits, I try to make them more deliberate rather than accidents of history. Any belief you took in a package, ex-Democrat, Catholic American, is suspect and should be reevaluated from base principles. I try not to have too much I've pre-decided. I think creating identities and labels locks you in and keeps you from seeing the truth. To be honest, speak without identity. I used to identify as libertarian, but then I would find myself defending positions I hadn't really thought through because they are a part of the libertarian canon. If all your beliefs line up into neat little bundles, you should be highly suspicious. I don't like to self-identify on almost any level anymore, which keeps me from having too many of these so-called stable beliefs. We each have a contrarian belief society rejects. But the more our own identity and local tribe reject it, the more real it likely is. There are 2 attractive lessons about suffering in the long term. It can make you accept the world the way it is. The other lesson is it can make your ego change in an extremely hard way. Maybe you're a competitive athlete and you get injured badly. Like Bruce Lee, you have to accept being an athlete is not your entire identity, and maybe you can forge a new identity as a philosopher. Facebook redesigns, Twitter redesigns. Personalities, careers, and teams also need redesigns. There are no permanent solutions in a dynamic system. Tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are. Learn the skills of decision-making. The classical virtues are all decision-making heuristics to make one optimize for the long term rather than for the short term. Self-serving conclusions should have a higher bar. I do view a lot of my goals over the next few years of unconditioning previous learned responses or habituated responses, so I can make decisions more cleanly in the moment with relying on memory or prepackaged heuristics and judgments. Almost all biases are time-saving heuristics. For important decisions, discard memory and identity and focus on the problem. Radical honesty just means I want to be free. Part of being free means I can say what I think and think what I say. They're highly congruent and integrated. Theoretical physicist Richard Feynman famously said, "You should never, ever fool anybody, and you are the easiest person to fool. The moment you tell somebody something dishonest, you've lied to yourself. Then you'll start believing your own lie, which will disconnect you from reality and take you down the wrong road. I never ask if I like it or I don't like it. I think this is what it is or this is what it isn't." Richard Feynman, it's really important for me to be honest. I don't go out of my way volunteering negative or nasty things. I would combine radical honesty with an old rule Warren Buffett has, which is praise specifically, criticize generally. I try to follow this. I don't always follow it, but I think I follow it enough to have made a difference in my life. If you have a criticism of someone, then don't criticize the person. Criticize the general approach or criticize the class of activities. If you have to praise somebody, then always try and find the person who is the best example of what you're praising and praise the person, specifically. Then people's egos and identities, which we all have, don't work against you. They work for you. Any advice on developing capacity for instinctual blunt honesty? Tell everyone. Start now. It doesn't have to be blunt. Charisma is the ability to project confidence and love at the same time. It's almost always possible to be honest and positive. As an investor and CEO of AngelList, you're paid to be right when other people are wrong. Do you have a process around how you make decisions? Yes, decision-making is everything. In fact, someone who makes decisions right 80% of the time, instead of 70% of the time, will be valued and compensated in the market hundreds of times more. I think people have a hard time understanding a fundamental fact of leverage. If I manage $1 billion and I'm right 10% more often than somebody else, my decision-making creates $100 million worth of value on a judgment call. With modern technology and large workforces and capital, our decisions are leveraged more and more. If you can be more right and more rational, you're going to get nonlinear returns in your life. I love the blog Farnham Street because it really focuses on helping you be more accurate and overall better decision maker. Decision-making is everything. The more you know, the less you diversify. Collect mental models during decision-making. The brain is a memory prediction machine. A lousy way to do memory prediction is X happened in the past, therefore X will happen in the future. It's too based on specific circumstances. What you want is principles. You want mental models. The best mental models I have found came through evolution, game theory, and Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger is Warren Buffett's partner, very good investor. He has tons and tons of great mental models. Author and trader Nassim Taleb has great mental models. Benjamin Franklin had great mental models. I basically load my head full of mental models. I use my tweets and other people's tweets as maxims that help compress my own learnings and recall them. The brain space is finite. You have finite neurons, so you can almost think of these as pointers, addresses, or mnemonics to help you remember deep-seated principles where you have the underlying experience to back it up. If you don't have the underlying experience, then it just reads like a collection of quotes. It's cool, it's inspirational for a moment, maybe you'll make a nice poster out of it. But then you forget it and move on. Mental models are really just compact ways for you to recall your own knowledge. Evolution. I think a lot of modern society can be explained through evolution. One theory is civilization exists to answer the question of who gets to mate. If you look around, from a purely sexual selection perspective, sperm is abundant and eggs are scarce. It's an allocation problem. Literally, all of the works of mankind and womankind can be traced down to people trying to solve this problem. Evolution, thermodynamics, information theory, and complexity have explanatory and predictive power in many aspects of life. Inversion. I don't believe I have the ability to say what is going to work. Rather, I try to eliminate what's not going to work. I think being successful is just about not making mistakes. It's not about having correct judgment. It's about avoiding incorrect judgments. Complexity theory. I was really into complexity theory back in the mid-90s. The more I got into it, the more I understand the limits of our knowledge and the limits of our prediction capability. Complexity has been super helpful to me. It has helped me come to a system that operates in the face of ignorance. I believe we are fundamentally ignorant and very, very bad at predicting the future. Economics, microeconomics, and game theory are fundamental. I don't think you can be successful in business, or even navigate most of our modern capitalist society, without an extremely good understanding of supply and demand, labor versus capital, game theory, and those kinds of things. Ignore the noise. The market will decide. Principal agent problem to me. The principal agent problem is the single most fundamental problem in microeconomics. If you do not understand the principal agent problem, you will not know how to navigate your way through the world. It is important if you want to build a successful company or be successful in your dealings. It's a very simple concept. Julius Caesar famously said, "If you want it done, then go. And if not, then send." What he meant was, if you want it done right, then you have to go yourself and do it. When you are the principal, then you are the owner. You care and you will do a great job. When you are the agent and you are doing it on somebody else's behalf, you can do a bad job. You just don't care. You optimize for yourself rather than for the principal's assets. The smaller the company, the more everyone feels like a principal. The less you feel like an agent, the better the job you're going to do. The more closely you can tie someone's compensation to the exact value they're creating, the more you turn them into a principal, and the less you turn them into an agent. I think at a core fundamental level, we understand this. We're attracted to principles, and we all bond with principles. But the media and modern society spend a lot of time brainwashing you about needing an agent being important, and the agent being knowledgeable. Compound interest, most of you should know it in the finance context. If you don't, crack open a microeconomics textbook. It's worth reading a microeconomics textbook from start to finish. An example of compound interest, let's say you're earning 10% a year on your $1. The first year you make 10% and you end up with $1.10. The next year you end up with $1.21 and the next year $1.33. It keeps adding onto itself. If you're compounding at 30% per year for 30 years, you don't just end up with 10 or 20 times your money, you end up with thousands of times your money. In the intellectual domain, compound interest rules when you look at a business with 100 users growing at a compound rate of 20% per month. It can very quickly stack up to having millions of users. Sometimes, even the founders of these companies are surprised by how large the business scales. Basic math. I think basic mathematics is really underrated. If you're going to make money, if you're going to invest money, your basic math should be really good. You don't need to learn geometry, trigonometry, calculus, or any of the complicated stuff if you're just going into business. But you want arithmetic, probability, and statistics. Those are extremely important. Crack open a basic math book and make sure you are really good at multiplying, dividing, compounding, probability, and statistics. Black swans. There's a new branch of probability statistics, which is really around tail events. Black swans are extreme probabilities. Again, I have to refer back to Nassim Taleb, who I think is one of the greatest philosopher-scientists of our times. He's really done a lot of pioneering work on this. Calculus is useful to know, to understand the rates of change and how nature works. But it's more important to understand the principles of calculus, where you're measuring the change in small discrete or small continuous events. It's not important you solve integrals or do derivations on demand, because you're not going to need to in the business world.